Tom Bradley wiped the sweat from his brow as he watched the woman in expensive running gear collapse just outside his rusted farm gate. What he didn't know was that this stranger, gasping for breath in the summer heat, was about to transform his failing farm into something extraordinary. He didn't know she was Olympic champion Maria Santos, or that she'd been searching for the perfect location for her dream project. All he knew was someone needed help, and his grandmother's oak tree offered the only shade for miles. But as he carried that glass of water toward her, neither of them realized this simple act of kindness would bridge two worlds and create something neither had imagined possible. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The summer of 2024 had been merciless to Tom Bradley's small farm in rural Tennessee. At 52, he'd spent the better part of 3 decades trying to make the 100-acre property profitable, but each year seemed to bring new challenges that his dwindling savings couldn't overcome. The drought had lasted 4 months now, turning his one-screen pastures into patches of brown stubble that cracked underfoot. His cattle, now down to 12 head from the 40 he'd started with 5 years ago, clustered around the single working water pump, their ribs showing despite his best efforts to keep them fed. Tom stood on his front porch that Tuesday morning, coffee mug in hand, surveying the damage that another scorching day would bring. The thermometer on the side of his weathered farmhouse already read 86 degrees, and it wasn't even 9 o'clock. His grandfather's oak tree, the one constant that had remained unchanged through all the hardships, spread its massive branches across nearly a quarter of his front yard, its leaves rustling softly in what little breeze managed to find its way across the valley. That tree had been planted by his great-grandfather in 1923, the same year the family had first settled this land. Tom's father used to tell stories about how 3 generations of Bradley men had proposed to their wives beneath those branches, how family reunions had been held in its shade, how it had weathered storms that had leveled barns and knocked out power lines for weeks. Now it stood as perhaps the only thing on the property that hadn't deteriorated, its trunk thick enough that Tom couldn't wrap his arms around it, its canopy providing blessed relief from the relentless Tennessee sun. The sound of footsteps on gravel caught his attention, rhythmic and determined despite the early hour heat. Tom shaded his eyes with his hand and saw a figure approaching along the county road that ran past his property. It was a woman, probably in her 30s, wearing what looked like expensive athletic wear, the kind of moisture-wicking fabric and ergonomic design that cost more than Tom typically spent on clothes in 6 months. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that swung with each measured step, and even from a distance, he could see the professional way she carried herself, the efficient stride of someone who took running seriously. Tom had seen joggers pass by his property before, usually early in the morning, or late in the evening when the heat became more tolerable. The county road was popular with fitness enthusiasts from the more affluent neighborhoods about 10 miles south, people who drove out to the country for what they probably considered authentic rural exercise. Most of them wore expensive gear and ran with the latest fitness watches, tracking every step and heartbeat as they pursued their health goals in the picturesque countryside. But as this particular jogger approached his gate, something seemed different. Her pace had slowed considerably, and she was weaving slightly, one hand pressed to her side. Tom set down his coffee mug and walked closer to the fence line, his farmer's instinct for recognizing distress kicking in. He'd seen enough animals in trouble over the years to recognize the signs of heat exhaustion in any living creature. The woman stumbled, caught herself against his wooden gate post, and stood there swaying for a moment before her legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the gravel road, her breathing rapid and shallow, her face flushed with a dangerous shade of red that Tom recognized immediately. Heatstroke was no joke in this kind of weather, especially for someone who'd been pushing themselves physically. Without hesitation, Tom vaulted over his low fence and knelt beside the fallen jogger. Up close, he could see that despite her obvious distress, she was in remarkable physical condition. Her muscles were defined in the way that spoke of years of serious athletic training, not just casual fitness. There was something almost familiar about her features, though Tom couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle but urgent. "You need to get out of this sun." Her eyes fluttered open, dark brown and momentarily unfocused. I'm okay, she whispered, trying to push herself up. Just need a minute. No, ma'am, you're not okay, Tom said firmly, slipping his arms under her shoulders and knees. You're burning up, and this heat's not going to get any better. I'm going to carry you into some shade. She started to protest, but Tom was already lifting her. Despite his own struggles with the farm, years of physical labor had kept him strong, and she was lighter than many of the feed sacks he routinely hefted. He carried her across his yard to the blessed coolness beneath the oak tree, where he dragged an old wooden lawn chair that morning while drinking his coffee. There we go, he said, settling her gently into the chair. You just sit right there while I get you some water. The shade beneath the oak was at least 15 degrees cooler than the exposed road, and Tom could see the woman's breathing begin to slow almost immediately. The tree's canopy was so thick that even at midday, very little direct sunlight penetrated to the ground below. Generations of fallen leaves had created a natural carpet that felt soft and cool underfoot, and the massive trunk provided a natural windbreak that seemed to create its own microclimate. Tom jogged back to his house and returned with a large glass of ice water and a damp towel. He handed her the water first, watching as she drank it gratefully, then offered the towel for her forehead and neck. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger now. I don't know what happened. I've run this route before, but today just hit me different. This heat's been brutal, Tom replied, settling onto the ground beside her chair. Supposed to hit 102 today, and it's not even 10 o'clock yet. You picked a rough day for a long run. She looked around at the farm spread out before them, taking in the struggling pastures and the weathered buildings with the eye of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. This is beautiful land, she said. How long have you been farming here? My family's been on this property for over a century, Tom answered, pride mixing with resignation in his voice. I've been running it myself for about 30 years now, though running might be too generous a term these days. Drought? She asked, and Tom was surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. Among other things, he admitted. Cattle prices, feed costs, equipment breaking down. Some years are just harder than others. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the woman sipping water, and Tom unconsciously cataloging all the things he needed to fix, replace, or somehow afford. The barn roof that leaked in 3 places. The tractor that needed a new transmission. The fence posts that were rotting and needed replacement before winter. The list seemed endless, and his bank account seemed perpetually insufficient to address even the most urgent repairs. I'm Maria, by the way, the woman said, extending her hand. Maria Santos. Tom Bradley, he replied, shaking her hand and noting the firm grip of someone accustomed to physical challenges. Pleased to meet you, though I wish it was under better circumstances. Better circumstances? Maria smiled, and Tom noticed how it transformed her entire face. You just saved me from heat stroke with about the most generous hospitality I've experienced in years. I'd say these are pretty good circumstances. Tom felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment. Just common decency. Anyone would have done the same. You'd be surprised, Maria said quietly, and there was something in her tone that suggested she spoke from experience. Not everyone stops to help a stranger. Not everyone has a chair waiting under a perfect tree. Not everyone makes time for kindness when they're clearly dealing with their own challenges. She gestured toward the struggling farm, and Tom realized she'd been observing more than he'd given her credit for. Her eyes moved across the property with the analytical gaze of someone accustomed to assessing resources and potential, someone who could read stories in landscapes and structures. What kind of farming do you focus on? She asked. Cattle mostly. Some hay production when the weather cooperates, Tom answered. My grandfather raised dairy cows, but that became uneconomical years ago. I've been trying to make it work with beef cattle, but the margins are tight even in good years. And this isn't a good year, Maria observed. This isn't a good decade, Tom admitted with a rueful laugh. But the land's been in my family too long to give up without a fight. My great-grandfather cleared most of these fields by hand. My grandfather built that barn with help from neighbors who paid him back with labor when they needed their own buildings raised. My father modernized what he could afford to modernize. I keep thinking I owe it to them to find a way to make it work. Maria nodded thoughtfully, her eyes still moving across the property. Tom followed her gaze and tried to see it through a stranger's eyes. The house was solid, but needed paint and some roof work. The barn was crap. Functional, but showed its age in the way the doors hung slightly crooked and the metal roof had developed a patina of rust. The fencing was a patchwork of repairs spanning several decades. Some sections newer wire mesh, others older wooden posts and rails that his grandfather had installed. But the land itself was beautiful, Tom had to admit. The rolling hills created natural boundaries and interesting, quote, topography. And when the grass was green, it really was picture postcard Tennessee farmland. The oak tree was undeniably magnificent, its presence lending dignity and permanence to the entire homestead. On better days, when his financial worries weren't quite so pressing, Tom could still see why his ancestors had chosen this particular spot to build their lives. How many acres? Maria asked. Just over 100, Tom replied. Enough to make a living if you know what you're doing and get a little luck with weather and prices. Not quite enough to survive the kind of setbacks we've been having. Have you considered diversifying? Maybe agritourism or events? Tom laughed, but not unkindly. Ma'am, I appreciate the suggestion, but I don't think this place is quite ready for paying guests. Besides, I wouldn't know the first thing about running that kind of business. Maria was quiet for a long moment, finishing her water and dabbing the damp towel against her neck. Tom noticed that her color had returned to normal, and her breathing had completely recovered. Whatever had caused her collapse, the shade and hydration seemed to have resolved it. I should probably head back, she said eventually. My car's parked about 2 miles down the road. I was doing a Newtan back run, but I think I'll stick to walking for the return trip. Nonsense, Tom said, standing up. Let me drive you back to your car. This heat's not getting any better, and you don't want to push your luck twice in one day. I couldn't impose further, Maria protested, but Tom was already shaking his head. It's not an imposition. My old truck's got decent air conditioning, and it'll take 5 minutes. Besides, it'll give me peace of mind knowing you made it back safely. 10 minutes later, they were driving down the county road in Tom's 15-year-old pickup truck. The air conditioning running full blast and country music playing softly on the radio. Maria seemed fascinated by the rural landscape, asking questions about the other farms they passed and the local geography. That's the Peterson place, Tom explained as they drove past a well-maintained property with new fencing and freshly painted buildings. They switched to organic vegetables about 10 years ago and sell directly to restaurants in Nashville. Seems to be working well for them. And that one? Maria pointed to a smaller farm with what looked like a specialty crop. Lavender, Tom said. Started as a retirement hobby for the wife, but now they do tours and sell products at farmers markets. Amazing what people will pay for handmade soap and essential oils. When they reached Maria's car, a sleek silver sedan that probably cost more than Tom made in a year, she turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Tom, I want to thank you again. Not just for the water and shade, but for the kindness. For treating a stranger like someone worth helping. Like I said, anyone would have done the same thing. No, Maria said firmly. They really wouldn't have. Trust me on that. She reached into her car and pulled out a business card, handing it to Tom through the window. I'd like to stay in touch, if that's all right. I have some ideas percolating, and I might want to talk to you about them sometime. Tom glanced at the card and felt his eyebrows rise. It was elegant and simple, with just her name and contact information, but at the bottom was a small logo he recognized from somewhere, though he couldn't quite place Kyle. Ideas about what? He asked. About making good use of beautiful land and magnificent trees, Maria said cryptically. About second chances and new possibilities. About what happens when the right people find the right place at the right time. She started her car and rolled down the window. Take care, Tom Bradley. I have a feeling we'll be talking again soon. As Tom drove back to his farm, he found himself thinking about the morning's encounter with an intensity that surprised him. There had been something about Maria Santos that didn't quite add up. Her athletic conditioning was clearly professional level. not just the result of casual fitness activities. Her clothes were expensive, and her car suggested significant financial resources. But more than that, there had been an energy about her, a sense of purpose and possibility that seemed to fill whatever space she occupied. He pulled the business card from his shirt pocket at a red light and studied it more carefully. The logo at the bottom was starting to look keen, familiar, but he still couldn't place it. He made a mental note to look it up when he got home, though his ancient desktop computer and unreliable internet connection made online research a sometimes frustrating process. Back at the farm, Tom tried to return to his normal routine, but found his attention constantly drifting back to the conversation under the oak tree. Maria had looked at his property with the eyes of someone who saw potential rather than just problems. She'd asked intelligent questions about diversification and land use, suggestions that showed she understood both the challenges and opportunities of rural property. Most visitors to his farm, the few he had, saw only the obvious struggles: the peeling paint, the struggling pastures, the equipment that needed replacement. They offered sympathy or well-meaning advice about selling out and moving to town, finding a job with benefits and a steady paycheck. But Maria had seemed to see something else entirely, something that made her eyes light up with what looked like genuine excitement. That evening, Tom finally managed to get his computer running and searched for Maria Santos online. What he found made him sit back in his chair with astonishment. Maria Santos wasn't just any jogger who happened to collapse near his gate. She was a retired Olympic track and field athlete, a gold medalist in the heptathlon who had competed in 3 Olympic Games and held several national records. After retiring from competition, she'd become involved in youth athletics programs and had recently made headlines for her work establishing training facilities for underprivileged young athletes. Tom stared at the screen, reading article after article about Maria's post-Olympic career. She'd apparently made substantial money through endorsements and appearances during her competing years, and had invested wisely enough to pursue her passion projects without financial constraints. Her foundation focused on providing access to high-quality athletic training and education opportunities for young people who might not otherwise have such chances. The more he read, the more puzzled he became about her interest in his farm. What could a successful former Olympian possibly want with a struggling cattle ranch in rural Tennessee? The answer came exactly 1 month later, on another brutally hot Tuesday morning. Tom was fixing a section of fence when he heard cars approaching on his gravel driveway. Not one car, but several, moving slowly and carefully over the rutted surface that he'd been meaning to grade for the past 2 years. The lead vehicle was Maria's silver sedan, followed by a large SUV and a pickup truck pulling a trailer loaded with surveying equipment. Tom set down his wire cutters and walked toward the house, wiping his hands on his work jeans and wondering what kind of situation he was about to find himself in. Maria emerged from her car wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt, her hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail he remembered. But her expression was different this time, more focused and businesslike, though she still smiled warmly when she saw him approaching. "Hello, Tom," she said. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit, but I have some people I'd like you to meet." The other vehicles had disgorged a small group of professional-looking individuals carrying clipboards, cameras, and what appeared to be surveying equipment. Tom recognized the type: people who assessed property for various purposes, though he couldn't imagine what purpose might apply to his farm. "These are architects and planners from my development team," Maria explained. "I've been telling them about your property, and they wanted to see it for themselves." "Development team?" Tom asked, the sinking feeling beginning in his stomach. He'd heard enough stories about developers swooping in to buy up rural land for suburban expansion or commercial projects. "Not that kind of development," Maria said quickly, apparently reading his expression. "Tom, remember how I said I had some ideas percolating? Well, they've been percolating for a month now, and I think I've figured out exactly what I want to propose." She gestured toward the oak tree, where one of the architects was already taking measurements and photographs. "I've been looking for the perfect location for a very specific project, a residential training facility for young athletes, combined with agricultural education and outdoor leadership development. A place where kids from urban areas can come for summer programs or year-round training while learning about sustainable living, responsibility, and the kind of character development that comes from working with the land." End quote. Tom stared at her, trying to process what she was suggesting. "You want to turn my farm into a camp?" "I want to turn your farm into something unprecedented," Maria corrected. "A place where young people can pursue athletic excellence while also learning life skills that will serve them whether they make it to the Olympics or become farmers or doctors or teachers. A place where the values of hard work, perseverance, and community support aren't just talked about but lived every day." End quote. She walked toward the oak tree, Tom following along with the growing group of professionals who were measuring, photographing, and taking notes about everything they saw. "This tree would be the centerpiece," Maria continued, her voice taking on the passionate tone of someone describing a cherished dream. "Can you imagine it surrounded by young people every evening, sharing stories about their day, their goals, their challenges? It would be like a natural amphitheater for community building." One of the architects, a woman about Maria's age with graying hair and intelligent eyes, approached them with a tablet in her hands. "The topography is absolutely perfect," she said to Maria. "Natural drainage, varied elevations for different types of facilities, and that tree provides a focal point that money can't buy." "Tom," Maria said, turning to face him directly, "I want you to be my partner in this project. Not just a landlord or a consultant, but a full partner, co-founder, facility manager, and mentor to the young people who would come here." Tom felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Maria, I don't know anything about running a camp or training athletes. I'm just a farmer who can't even make farming work anymore." "You're exactly what this project needs," Maria insisted. "You understand the land, you know how to work with your hands, and most importantly, you have the kind of character that comes from facing challenges with dignity and persistence. Do you think those qualities might be valuable for young people to observe and learn from?" The surveyor had set up his equipment near the barn and was making calculations, while another team member took soil samples. Tom watched them work with the same sense of unreality he'd experienced the month before, when Maria had first collapsed at his gate. These people were serious, professional, and apparently working on the assumption that his farm was about to become something entirely different from what it had been for the past century. "What would happen to my cattle?" Tom asked, grasping for concrete details in the midst of this overwhelming proposal. "We'd incorporate them into the program," Maria answered immediately. "Part of the agricultural education component. Young people learning animal husbandry, responsibility for living creatures, the connection between food production and environmental stewardship. Your cattle wouldn't be a problem to work around. They'd be an integral part of what we're creating." End quote. "And my house?" "Would become the manager's residence, with some modifications for accessibility and efficiency. We'd also build additional residential facilities for the young athletes, training facilities, a dining hall, and educational spaces. But we'd design everything to complement and enhance what already exists, rather than replacing it." Tom walked closer to the oak tree, where the architect was now sketching something on her tablet, while looking up at the massive canopy. The professional activity swirling around his property felt surreal, like watching a movie being filmed on his land. "How would something like this work financially?" he asked Maria. "I mean, who pays for the construction, the operations, the staff?" "My foundation provides the initial funding and ongoing operational support," Maria explained. "We've been planning this kind of facility for years, and we have donors who are specifically interested in this type of comprehensive youth development program. As for your involvement, you'd receive a partnership stake in the project plus salary as the facility manager. You'd be financially secure while doing something that could literally change hundreds of young lives." End quote. The surveyor called out to Maria, apparently ready to show her some findings. While she walked over to examine his measurements, Tom found himself standing alone beneath the oak tree, trying to imagine the transformation she was describing. He'd spent 30 years working this land, fighting to make it profitable, watching it slowly deteriorate as his resources dwindled and his options narrowed. He'd assumed that his story here would end with bankruptcy and a forced sale, probably to developers who would subdivide the property for suburban housing. The idea that it could instead become something vibrant and purposeful, something that honored the land while serving a greater good, had never entered his mind. But as he looked around at the activity, at the obvious expertise and serious intent of Maria's team, Tom began to see his property through their eyes. The natural amphitheater created by the rolling hills really would be perfect for outdoor gatherings and activities. The barn could be renovated into educational space while maintaining its rural character. The various elevations and natural features would provide diverse environments for different types of training and learning. And the oak tree, his great-grandfather's oak tree, would indeed become the heart of it all. Instead of shading one struggling farmer's solitary coffee breaks, it would provide gathering space for young people pursuing their dreams while learning the kinds of values that Tom's family had tried to embody for 4 generations. "Tom!" Maria called, waving him over to join the group examining the surveyor's findings. "Come look at this. I think you'll find it interesting." The surveyor's tablet showed a topographical map of the property overlaid with preliminary facility plans. Tom could see immediately that the architects had approached the project with real sensitivity to the existing landscape. The proposed buildings followed natural contours and were positioned to minimize environmental impact while maximizing functionality. "We're envisioning about 40 young people in residence at any given time," Maria explained, pointing to various areas on the map. "Dormitory-style housing here and here, designed to look like connected farm buildings. Training facilities positioned to take advantage of the natural flat areas, with the more intensive athletic equipment housed in structures that won't be visible from the main gathering areas." End quote. "The dining hall would be here," the architect added, indicating a spot that Tom recognized as a natural clearing where his grandfather used to hold family reunions. "Large enough for communal meals, but designed to feel intimate and welcoming. And we'd connect it to the main house with covered walkways that could serve as outdoor classroom space in good weather." Tom studied the plans, impressed despite himself by the thoughtfulness of the design. These weren't people who wanted to bulldoze his farm and start over. They were professionals who understood how to enhance and expand what already existed, creating something new while respecting what had come before. "What age range are you thinking about?" Tom asked. "Primarily 14 to 18, Maria answered. "Old enough to handle real responsibility and serious training, young enough to be genuinely shaped by the experience. We have some programs for younger kids during the summer, and we're hoping to eventually offer postgraduate opportunities for young adults who want to continue developing their skills while transitioning to college or careers." Unquote. "And they'd all be athletes?" "Athletes, potential athletes, and young people who could benefit from the structure and goal setting that athletic training provides," Maria clarified. "Not everyone would be competing at elite levels, but everyone would be working to improve themselves physically, mentally, and emotionally. The agricultural component would ensure that they're also learning practical skills and developing an understanding of where food comes from and how human activities affect the environment." "Ah." One of the other team members, a man Tom hadn't been introduced to, approached with what looked like financial projections on his tablet. "The numbers work very well," he told Maria. "Construction costs are reasonable given the existing infrastructure, and the operational model is sustainable based on our other similar facilities." "Other facilities?" Tom asked. "This would be our flagship location," Maria explained. "But we operate 3 smaller programs in other states. Nothing quite like what we're envisioning here, though. The combination of agricultural education, athletic training, and character development in this kind of setting is unique." Tom felt a sudden need to sit down. The morning had begun with him fixing fence and worrying about whether he could afford to repair his tractor before hay season. Now he was looking at architectural plans for a facility that would transform not just his property but his entire life. "This is a lot to process," he admitted. "Of course it is," Maria said, her tone becoming gentler. "Tom, I'm not asking you to decide today. I'm asking you to think about it. Maybe visit one of our other facilities to see how this kind of program actually works. Talk to other people who've made similar transitions. Take whatever time you need to make a decision that feels right for you." "But you are serious about this? This isn't just preliminary exploration?" "We're completely serious," Maria assured him. We've been looking for the right location for 2 years. We have the funding, we have the expertise, and we have young people waiting for opportunities like this. What we've been missing is the perfect combination of land, location, and the right partner to help us create something truly special. The architect who had been sketching approached them with her tablet, showing a detailed drawing of how the oak tree area might look, with subtle landscaping and seating that would accommodate large groups while maintaining the natural character of the space. "It's beautiful," Tom said, and meant it. The drawing showed young people engaged in various activities around the tree, some sitting in groups talking, others reading or studying, a few engaged in what looked like quiet individual reflection. The scene looked both purposeful and peaceful. Exactly the kind of environment Tom imagined his great-grandfather would have approved of. The tree would be protected throughout construction, the architect assured him. We'd actually improve its long-term health by addressing some drainage issues and providing better soil management around the root system. As the team continued their work, Tom found himself following Maria around the property as she pointed out various features and possibilities. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and her knowledge of both athletics and agriculture was clearly extensive. She asked intelligent questions about his cattle management, soil conditions, and water resources, while simultaneously explaining how various aspects of the property would serve the residential program she envisioned. The kids would have real responsibilities, she explained as they walked past his small herd of cattle. Daily chores, animal care, maintenance projects. Not just busy work, but genuine contributions to the operation of the facility. They'd learn that their comfort and success depend on everyone doing their part. "That's how I was raised," Tom said. "My father had me feeding chickens and collecting eggs before I was old enough for school. By the time I was 12, I was responsible for a dozen head of cattle and had to keep records of feed costs and health issues." "Exactly," Maria said, her eyes lighting up. "That kind of responsibility teaches lessons that can't be learned in a classroom. And having an adult mentor who understands those lessons from personal experience, who can share stories and provide guidance based on real knowledge, that's invaluable." End quote. They paused at the top of a small rise that overlooked most of the property. From this vantage point, Tom could see his land the way Maria's team was seeing it, as a canvas for something larger and more significant than individual survival. The rolling hills, the mix of open pasture and wooded areas, the creek that ran along the western boundary, the solid buildings that could be renovated and expanded. It all fit together in a way that suggested natural suitability for the kind of comprehensive program Maria was describing. "Can I ask you something?" Tom said. "Why me? I mean, you obviously have the resources to buy any property you wanted. You could hire professional managers with experience in this CA kind of program. Why partner with a struggling farmer who doesn't know anything about youth development or athletic training?" End quote. Maria was quiet for a moment, looking out over the valley below them. "Do you remember what you said when I asked about your family's history on this land? About owing something to the people who came before you? About not giving up without a fight?" "I remember. That's exactly the kind of character I want young people to be around," Maria continued. "Not someone who succeeded easily or had everything handed to them, but someone who understands what it means to persist through difficulty, to find dignity in hard work, to care about something bigger than your own immediate comfort." She gestured toward the oak tree, visible from their hilltop position as a massive green canopy that seemed to anchor the entire landscape. "You didn't just offer me shade and water that day. You offered kindness to a complete stranger without expecting anything in return. You saw someone in need and responded immediately. Naturally, as if that was simply what decent people do. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Tom felt his cheeks warming again. "I still say anyone would have done the same thing. And I still say you're wrong about that," Maria replied firmly. "But the fact that you believe it, the fact that this kind of generosity feels normal and natural to you, that's exactly why you're the right person for this project." By the time Maria's team finished their survey and preliminary planning, it was late afternoon, and the heat had begun to subside slightly. Tom invited everyone to sit under the oak tree for cold drinks before they left, and found himself enjoying the conversation as the professionals discussed their findings and shared stories about similar projects they'd worked on. The architect pulled up images on her tablet of the other facilities. Maria's foundation operated, and Tom was impressed by how they'd managed to create modern, functional spaces that still felt connected to their natural environments. The buildings were clearly designed by people who understood both the practical needs of residential programs and the importance of creating spaces that felt welcoming rather than institutional. The key is integration, the architect explained. We want the facilities to feel like they grew naturally from the landscape, not like they were imposed on it. The goal is for someone to visit 5 years from now and feel like everything has always been exactly as they found it. As the team prepared to leave, Maria handed Tom a folder containing preliminary plans, financial projections, and contact information for people at their other facilities who could answer questions about the practical aspects of the program. "Take your time with this," she said. "But Tom, I hope you'll seriously consider it. I think this could be exactly what this land has been waiting for, and exactly what you've been working toward without realizing it." That evening, Tom sat under the oak tree with the folder open on his lap, reading through the detailed proposals by the light of a battery-powered lantern. The financial projections showed that he would indeed be secure, probably more financially stable than he'd been since inheriting the farm. But more than that, the program descriptions painted a picture of daily life that sounded both challenging and deeply satisfying. He imagined waking up each morning to the sounds of young people beginning their day with purpose and energy. He pictured himself teaching someone how to properly care for cattle, or showing a city kid how to read weather patterns and understand what the land was telling them. He envisioned evening gatherings under the oak tree, where young athletes shared their goals and struggles while learning from each other and from adults who had faced their own challenges. The more he read, the more Tom realized that Maria was right about this being what the land had been waiting for. His great-grandfather had cleared these fields so they could support life and growth. His grandfather had built the barn and planted the oak tree to create something that would last beyond his own lifetime. His father had modernized and adapted, always with an eye toward making the property more productive and sustainable. Tom had been thinking about his own relationship with the land too narrowly, focusing only on whether he could make it profitable as a traditional cattle operation. But profitability had never been the real point. The point had always been stewardship, creating something valuable that could be passed on to the next generation in better condition than it had been received. Maria's program would accomplish exactly that. Instead of passing on a struggling farm to children he didn't have, Tom could help create something that would serve hundreds of young people over the coming decades. Instead of fighting to preserve the past, he could help build a future that honored everything his family had worked for while adapting it to serve new needs and possibilities. 3 days later, Tom called Maria and told her he wanted to visit one of their existing facilities before making his final decision. She was delighted and arranged for him to spend a long weekend at their program in North Carolina, where he could observe daily operations and talk with staff members about their experiences. The North Carolina facility was smaller than what was planned for Tom's property, but the basic concept was the same. Young people from diverse backgrounds living together in a structured environment that combined athletic training, educational opportunities, and practical life skills. Tom spent his time there following different staff members through their daily routines, observing training sessions, and talking with the young residents about their experiences. What impressed him most was the sense of genuine community that had developed among the residents. These weren't just kids pursuing individual athletic goals while living in the same place. They had become a real family, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating each other's successes, and working together to maintain and improve their shared environment. "It's not like any camp or school I've ever seen," one of the 18-year-old residents told Tom during an evening conversation. "Everyone here actually cares about everyone else succeeding. The adults treat us like we're capable of real responsibility, and we step up to meet it because we don't want to let anyone down." The agricultural component was integrated seamlessly into daily life. Residents took turns caring for the facility's small herd of goats, maintained an extensive vegetable garden that supplied much of their food, and participated in ongoing projects to improve soil health and water conservation. These weren't token activities designed to keep young people busy, but genuine contributions to the facility's sustainability and self-sufficiency. Tom was particularly impressed by the mentorship relationships that had developed between the adult staff and the young residents. These weren't formal teacher-student relationships, but authentic bonds between people based on mutual respect and shared commitment to growth and improvement. The adults clearly cared about the young people as individuals, not just as athletes or students, and the young people responded with the kind of trust and openness that Tom recognized from his own relationship with Pease, his father and grandfather. On his final evening at the North Carolina facility, Tom joined the entire community for their weekly gathering under a large maple tree that served a similar function to his oak back home. The residents shared updates about their training progress, discussed challenges they were facing, and celebrated achievements both large and small. The atmosphere was supportive and encouraging, but also honest about the hard work required to pursue meaningful goals. "What I love most about this place," one 16-year-old girl said during the sharing time, "is that nobody pretends success is easy or that you can achieve anything without discipline and sacrifice. But they also make sure you know that the work is worth it and that you don't have to do it alone." Tom found himself thinking about his own teenage years, when his father had been teaching him to manage the farm. The lessons had been similar, though focused on different goals. Hard work, responsibility, persistence, and the understanding that individual success was always connected to the well-being of the larger community. The values Maria wanted to instill in young athletes were the same values that had sustained his family through 4 generations of farming. During the drive back to Tennessee, Tom realized that his decision had been made somewhere during those 3 days of observation and conversation. Maria's program wasn't asking him to abandon everything his family had built on that land. It was asking him to fulfill it in a way he never could have imagined. He called Maria from his truck, while stopped for gas about an hour from home. "I'm in," he said simply when she answered. "Tom, that's wonderful." Maria's excitement was audible even over the road noise. "Are you sure? Do you have any remaining questions or concerns?" "I'm sure," Tom replied. "This is what the land needs, and I think it's what I need too. Let's make it happen." The next 6 months passed in a whirlwind of planning, construction preparation, and learning. Tom spent 2 weeks at each of Maria's other facilities, shadowing experienced managers and learning the practical aspects of residential program administration. He discovered that his farming background had prepared him for much of what was required: the same attention to logistics, problem-solving, and care for living creatures, just applied to human development instead of VS. Cattle management. The construction began in early spring, and Tom was amazed by how carefully the architects and contractors worked to preserve the character of the property while adding the necessary facilities. True to their promises, every new building was designed to look like it had always belonged on the land. The dormitory structures resembled connected farm buildings, the dining hall could have been a renovated barn, and the training facilities were positioned to be functional without overwhelming the natural landscape. Throughout the construction process, Tom continued his normal farming activities while gradually transitioning toward his new role. Maria had suggested keeping most of his cattle initially, both to maintain continuity and to provide immediate agricultural education opportunities for the first groups of residents. The animals seemed to sense the changes happening around them, but adapted well to the increased activity and attention. The oak tree remained the centerpiece of all planning, and Tom was touched by how carefully everyone worked to protect and enhance its role in the developing community. The landscaping around it was subtle but effective, creating natural seating areas and gathering spaces that felt organic rather than constructed. Solar-powered lighting was installed to make evening activities possible without disrupting the tree's natural character. As the opening date approached, Tom found himself both excited and nervous about the responsibility he was undertaking. He would be managing not just facilities and logistics, but helping to shape the daily experiences of young people at crucial points in their development. The weight of that responsibility was balanced by his growing confidence that this was exactly what he was meant to be doing. The first group of residents arrived on a warm September morning, 42 young people between the ages of 14 and 18, representing a diverse mix of athletic abilities, cultural backgrounds, and Personal circumstances. Some came from urban environments, where opportunities for this kind of comprehensive development were limited. Others were from rural areas, where athletic training resources were scarce. All of them shared a common desire to pursue excellence while developing the character and life skills that would serve them regardless of their ultimate career paths. Tom's role during those first weeks was part logistics coordinator, part agricultural instructor, and part surrogate grandfather to young people who were adapting to a new environment and new expectations. He found himself drawing on memories of conversations with his own father and grandfather, sharing stories about the land and the lessons it had taught his family over the decades. Mr. Bradley, one of the residents asked during the second week, as Tom was showing a group how to properly assess cattle health, "How did you know this was what you wanted to do with your life?" Tom paused in his examination of a young heifer, considering the question seriously. "I didn't know," he answered honestly. 6 months ago, I thought my story with this land was ending. I was failing as a farmer and facing the possibility of losing everything my family had built here. But sometimes, life surprises you with possibilities you never imagined. He gestured toward the activity visible across the property. Young people engaged in training sessions, educational activities, and the daily work of maintaining their shared community. What I've learned is that the land doesn't care whether you raise cattle or raise young people, as long as you do it with respect and commitment to something bigger than yourself. The agricultural education component proved to be even more successful than Tom had hoped. City kids, who had never seen a cow up close, discovered genuine fascination with animal behavior and care. Rural kids who had grown up around farming found new appreciation for the complexity and interconnectedness of agricultural systems. All of them learned lessons about responsibility, patience, and the relationship between daily care and long-term results. Evening gatherings under the oak tree became the highlight of each day, just as Maria had envisioned. The massive canopy provided shelter for conversations that ranged from immediate concerns about training schedules and academic work to deeper discussions about goals, values, and the kind of people the residents wanted to become. Tom often found himself sharing stories about his family's history on the land, connecting their experiences to the challenges and opportunities the young people were facing. "Your great-grandfather cleared these fields by hand?" asked Marcus, a 17-year-old sprinter from Detroit, during one October evening gathering. "Most of them," Tom confirmed. "He had help from neighbors for the biggest trees, but he spent the better part of 2 years removing stumps and stones to create the pastures you see now." "Why?" asked Sarah, a 15-year-old distance runner from Burr, rural Kentucky. "I mean, why this particular piece of land?" Tom looked around at the faces gathered in the circle. Young people from different backgrounds united by their presence in this place that had shaped his entire life. "I think he saw the same thing Maria saw when she first came here. Potential. The possibility of creating something valuable that would last beyond his own lifetime. And now we're part of that," observed Jamal, an 18-year-old who was combining athletic training with agricultural studies as preparation for a career in sustainable farming. "You're not just part of it," Tom corrected gently. "You're the reason for it. Everything that's happened on this land for the past century has been leading up to what you're doing here now." As autumn progressed into winter, Tom watched the first group of residents develop into a genuine community. The initial awkwardness and uncertainty had given way to real friendships and mutual support. The daily routines of training, studying, and maintaining their shared environment had created bonds that Tom recognized from his own experiences growing up in a family that worked together toward common goals. The success of the program exceeded even Maria's optimistic projections. The young people were thriving academically, athletically, and personally. Several had already achieved significant improvements in their competitive performances, but more importantly, all of them were developing the kind of character and life skills that would serve them in any future they chose to pursue. "Tom," Maria said during one of her regular visits to check on the program's progress, "you've exceeded every expectation I had when I first approached you about this partnership. The young people here don't just respect you, they genuinely love you. You've become exactly the kind of mentor figure I hoped you would be." Tom felt the familiar warmth of embarrassment at the praise, but also a deep satisfaction that he'd never experienced during his years of struggling to make the farm profitable. "It's not hard to care about these kids," he replied. "They work harder than most adults I know, and they're here because they want to become better people, not just better athletes." "The agricultural component has been particularly successful," Maria continued. "Several of the residents are talking about incorporating farming or environmental science into their college plans. That wasn't something we necessarily expected, but it's exactly the kind of expanded thinking we hoped the program would encourage." As winter turned towards spring, Tom began preparing for the arrival of the second group of residents, while helping the current group prepare for their transitions to college, professional training programs, or other next-stage steps in their development. The goodbyes were emotional for everyone involved, but also celebratory, as the young people left with clear plans for their futures and the confidence to pursue them successfully. "Mr. Bradley," Marcus said during the farewell gathering under the oak tree, "I want you to know that this year changed my life in ways I'm still figuring out. Not just the training, but everything. The way you taught us to see work as something meaningful, not just something you have to do. The way you showed us that taking care of things and people is what makes you strong, not what makes you weak." Similar sentiments were expressed by most of the departing residents, and Tom found himself moved by their gratitude and their genuine affection. These young people had arrived as strangers with individual goals and had developed into a family committed to supporting each other's success. Watching them leave to pursue their various paths was bittersweet, but Tom knew that the lessons they'd learned and the bonds they'd formed would continue to influence their lives for decades to come. The second year brought new challenges and new rewards. Word about the program had spread through athletic and educational networks, and applications far exceeded available spaces. Tom found himself involved in the selection process, helping Maria and her team identify young people who would benefit most from the comprehensive development approach while contributing positively to the residential community. "We're looking for potential," Maria had explained during one selection meeting. "Not just current achievement, the young person who's overcome obstacles to get where they are, who shows genuine commitment to improvement, who understands that individual success depends on community support." Tom had developed an eye for recognizing these qualities, often seeing potential in applicants that others might overlook. His farming background had taught him to evaluate long-term possibilities rather than just immediate appearances, and that skill translated well to assessing young people's capacity for growth and development. The program continued to evolve and improve. Tom implemented new agricultural education components based on his observations of what captured the residents' interest and imagination. Maria expanded the athletic training offerings to include sports and activities that some of the residents wanted to explore. The academic partnerships with local colleges were strengthened to provide even more opportunities for educational advancement. But the core elements remained constant. The daily rhythms of training, study, and shared responsibility, the evening gatherings under the oak tree, the mentorship relationships between adults and young people based on mutual respect and genuine care, and the understanding that individual excellence was always connected to community well-being and service to others. By the third year, Tom had fully settled into his role as co-founder and facility manager. The struggles and uncertainties of his farming years seemed like memories from someone else's life. He woke each morning with clear purpose and went to bed each evening with deep satisfaction about the day's accomplishments. The financial security was certainly welcome, but more important was the sense that his life's work was finally aligned with his deepest values and capabilities. "You know what I've realized?" Tom said to Maria during one of their regular planning meetings. "My father and grandfather weren't really farmers. They were stewards. They understood that their job was to take care of the land so it could support the next generation. That's exactly what we're doing here, just with a broader definition of what it means to cultivate and harvest." End quote. Maria smiled, the same warm expression Tom remembered from that first morning when he'd carried her to safety under the oak tree. "That's exactly right. And Tom, I want you to know that none of this would have been possible without your partnership. You didn't just provide land and facilities. You provided the wisdom and character that make this place truly special." As Tom looked around at the thriving community that had developed on land his great-grandfather had cleared by hand, he felt a profound sense of completion and continuity. The oak tree his family had tended for generations now sheltered young people from across the country as they pursued their dreams and developed into the kind of adults who would make positive contributions to their communities. The fields that had supported cattle for decades now supported something even more valuable: the growth and development of human potential. The struggling farmer who had offered shade to a collapsed jogger had become a mentor and leader whose influence would extend far beyond the boundaries of his 100 acres. The land that had seemed destined for failure and foreclosure had become a place where success was redefined and celebrated every day. The oak tree that had witnessed 4 generations of Bradley family history now stood at the center of a new kind of family, one that would send its members across the world to pursue their various callings while carrying with them the values and experiences they'd gained in this special place. Tom often thought about that first morning, when Maria's collapse at his gate had seemed like just another challenge in an already difficult day. Neither of them could have imagined that her moment of need would become the catalyst for transforming not just his property, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be successful, useful, and fulfilled. On quiet evenings, when the day's activities had ended and the residents had settled into their dormitories, Tom would sometimes sit alone under the oak tree and reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. The tree's massive trunk felt solid and permanent against his back, connecting him to all the generations of his family who had found strength and shelter in its presence. But now it also connected him to the young people who would carry forward the lessons they'd learned here, creating ripples of positive influence that would extend far beyond anything his great-grandfather could have envisioned when he'd planted a small sapling in newly cleared ground. The transformation was complete, but the story was still being written. Each new group of residents brought fresh energy and possibilities to the program. Each graduate who went on to success in athletics, academics, or other pursuits carried forward the values and experiences they'd gained during their time on the farm. Each evening gathering under the oak tree added new chapters to the ongoing narrative of what it meant to pursue excellence while remaining grounded in community, responsibility, and service to others. Tom Bradley had begun as a struggling farmer facing the possible loss of everything his family had built. He had become a mentor, leader, and co-founder of something unprecedented, a place where young people discovered not just their athletic potential, but their capacity to contribute meaningfully to the world around them. The land that had challenged him for 30 years had finally revealed its true purpose, not as a source of individual prosperity, but as a foundation for community growth and the cultivation of human excellence. The oak tree stood as it always had, its branches reaching toward the sky, while its roots remained deep in Tennessee soil. But now it sheltered dreams and aspirations from across the country, providing shade and stability for young people whose achievements would honor both their own potential and the values they'd learned in its shadow. The story that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a hot summer morning had become something larger and more lasting than either Tom or Maria could have imagined. A testament to what becomes possible when the right people find the right place at the right moment in time.